The discovery the house was quiet, the kind of silence that seemed too still, too polished, like glass that might shatter if touched. Alexandra Stone moved through her mansion with the practiced precision of a woman who lived her life by schedule, order, and iron control. Everything about her world gleamed: marble floors, spotless mirrors, walls adorned with modern art that screamed money. She was used to perfection. She was used to being obeyed. Nothing in her life was allowed to fall out of place. But that night, as she passed the nursery door, something struck her ear, a sound soft and melodic, out of sync with the white noise machine she'd carefully installed. A lullaby. Gentle, low, carried in a voice she didn't recognize. Alexandra froze. Her hand tightened on the brass door handle, the kind imported from Europe, each piece costlier than a month's wage for the staff that worked under her. She pushed the door open and the world tilted. Maya Williams sat in the rocking chair by the crib, her frame bent forward in a posture that was both protective and exhausted. Her soft brown eyes were closed, her lips moving in the shape of an old hymn, one she barely remembered from her childhood. And against her chest, nestled under a worn blanket, was Noah, Alexandra's only son. His tiny face, usually restless and red from endless crying, was calm. His mouth moved rhythmically, latched to Maya's breast. A milk-drunk smile hovered faintly as his fists unclenched, his tiny chest rising and falling in deep, peaceful breaths. It was a sight Alexandra hadn't seen in weeks, her son at peace, but the peace did not touch her. It ignited fury instead. For a moment, Alexandra's throat closed. Her eyes widened in disbelief and then narrowed into sharp, cold steel. The air felt poisonous in her lungs, the scent of baby powder and lavender mocking her with its false sweetness. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the lullaby like ice breaking across a lake. "Are you out of your mind, Maya? My baby cannot drink your filthy milk." The words snapped through the room with a venom that startled even herself. The lullaby faltered into silence. Maya's eyes flew open, wide with alarm, her arms instinctively tightening around Noah before loosening with care as she tried to shield him from the storm. She shifted slightly, pulling the blanket up higher across her chest, her voice trembling though she fought to keep it steady. "Miss Stone, please?" "You will do no such thing," Alexandra cut her off, her voice cool and deadly, worse than if she had shouted. It was the kind of tone that belonged to boardrooms and hostile takeovers, not nurseries. She took a step forward, her heels striking the hardwood like gunshots. "Put my child down." Maya obeyed instantly, not with the fumbling panic of someone guilty, but with the practiced tenderness of a caretaker who understood how fragile a baby's peace could be. She eased Noah back into the crib, adjusting him so his tiny arms rested across his chest. He gurgled softly, still content, unaware of the storm crackling just above his world. Alexandra's fury only sharpened at the sight. She strode forward, grabbed Maya by the forearm, and yanked her roughly away from the crib. "You think you can walk into my home, into my nursery, and put your body on my son like you belong here?" Her words were hissed through clenched teeth as she dragged Maya toward the door. They stopped at the top of the sweeping staircase, marble glinting below. Maya's eyes welled, but she didn't resist. Her voice cracked, desperate but still calm. "Miss Stone, he hadn't eaten in hours. The formula delivery didn't arrive. He was screaming, and I didn't know what else to do. Alexandra's hand lashed out before she could stop herself. The slap rang out louder than anything else in the quiet house, bouncing off marble and echoing into silence. Maya gasped, her cheeks stinging, her head snapping to the side. The tears threatened but did not fall. She stood still, trembling only in the faintest way. Alexandra's words followed like venom dripping into the wound. "Don't you dare play the victim. How dare you assume your used-up body is acceptable for my child? Look at you, your skin, your everything. You think a child like mine needs milk from someone like you?" The words landed like knives. Maya's lips parted, but no defense came out. She had been insulted before by strangers, by neighbors, by people who thought her worth could be measured by the shade of her skin or the job she took to keep her nieces fed. but never had it cut so sharply as in this moment. Not because of the insult itself, but because she was standing in the nursery of a billionaire, holding a child she had come to love as her own, only to be thrown out like trash. She lowered her eyes not from shame of her action, but from the weight of Alexandra's stare that treated her as though she were unclean. Her voice broke softly. "I wasn't trying to offend." "Oh, you offended," Alexandra spat. "You disgust me." Without another word, she barked orders to the head of security. Within minutes, Maya's few belongings, neatly folded uniforms, a worn leather bag were stuffed into boxes and escorted out. Alexandra stood at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, watching as Maya was led out of the house. "I never want to see her face again," she said coldly, before slamming the nursery door shut. Inside, the house returned to silence. But it was not the silence of peace. It was a silence heavy with something unspoken. A silence that carried Noah's restless stirring. That night, the house was too quiet. Alexandra had always prided herself on her control. Meetings, investors, meals, even Noah's feeding schedule were all run like clockwork. Control was her weapon, but tonight it slipped. Twice, Noah cried with a desperation that pierced through the walls. Alexandra rushed to him, warming the emergency formula herself, holding him as the pediatrician instructed. But Noah turned away. From the bottle, arching, wailing, inconsolable. His tiny face scrunched in despair, his fists trembling. Alexandra rocked him, whispered lullabies she barely remembered, but he did not settle. Not the way he had in Maya's arms? Not with that soft, milk-drunk smile that Alexandra had glimpsed only moments before her rage consumed her. When he finally fell into a fitful sleep, Alexandra stood over the crib, her hand hovering above his chest, watching the fragile rise and fall. A thought pressed itself into her mind, unwelcome, impossible to ignore. Was he crying for her? For Maya? She shook it off angrily, retreating to her room, where the mirror reflected a woman who no longer looked flawless. Her hair fell loose, her eyes were red, her skin pale. Shame made her look older. She poured herself a glass of wine, but it sat untouched on the nightstand. She couldn't silence the memory of that peaceful smile on Noah's face, or the truth hiding inside it. The next morning, pride battled curiosity, and curiosity won. Alexandra ordered her assistant to run a full background check on Maya Williams. Not, she told herself, out of guilt or paranoia, but out of due diligence. She expected to find something, a mistake, a scandal, some hidden flaw. Instead, what returned only twisted the knife deeper. Maya Denise Williams, age 29, former NICU nurse at Westlake General Hospital, terminated due to budget cuts. Single, guardian of 2 nieces, no criminal record. Attached to the file was a scanned photo, Maya in blue hospital scrubs, cradling a premature infant no larger than a hand. Beneath the photo, a typed note from grateful parents. "Nurse Williams saved our baby's life." Alexandra stared at the screen, her throat closing. She remembered the slap, the words, the disgust in her own voice. And she felt the first crack in her control. The shame was heavier now, mixed with an ache she couldn't name. She had cast out not just a maid, but a woman who had once saved lives, who had saved children like Noah. The realization pressed down on her until she could hardly breathe. That night, Noah cried again. He cried until Alexandra's arms shook with exhaustion, until her whispered lullabies cracked into tears of their own. Finally, as she laid him in his crib, she saw his fists clenched tightly, his face twisted in a silent sob even in sleep. And, for the first time in years, Alexandra Stone felt something she couldn't push away with wealth or control. She felt powerless. And somewhere across town, in a run-down apartment with peeling paint and a smell of canned beans, Maya Williams sat on a second-hand sofa with her 2 nieces curled against her. A faint bruise still marked her cheek where Alexandra's hand had landed. Her heart ached not for herself, but for the baby she had left behind, the baby whose cries she could almost still hear in the quiet. She held her nieces close, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "We'll be okay. Somehow, we'll be okay." But deep down, she knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of something far larger than either woman could imagine. The fracture morning sunlight streamed into the nursery, bouncing against pale blue walls and the polished white crib that sat like a centerpiece of Alexandra Stone's carefully designed life. Everything in the room was curated: the custom crib from Italy, the organic cotton sheets, the white noise machine chosen after a dozen consultations, even the hand-painted mural of soft clouds drifting across the ceiling. It should have been perfect. It should have felt like safety. But Alexandra sat slumped in the rocking chair, her silk blouse creased, her hair pulled into a careless knot, her face lined with exhaustion. Noah squirmed in her arms, rejecting the bottle she held to his lips. His tiny fists batted the air, his cries sharp and unrelenting. The noise pierced her head until it felt like the walls were closing in. She whispered promises, coaxed, begged him to drink. But he turned away, arching in protest, his cheeks flushed with distress. It had been 3 days since she had sent Maya away. 3 days of restless nights, of formula gone cold and untouched. Bottles of lullabies sung in a voice that shook with fatigue. 3 days of shame that she tried to bury under anger but couldn't. She had always believed money solved problems. If something broke, you bought a new one. If someone failed, you hired someone better. But no amount of money, no roster of qualified staff, no perfectly measured formula could soothe Noah the way Maya had. Alexandra knew it, though she refused to admit it aloud. She remembered too clearly that fleeting smile on his lips as he drifted into a milk-drunk sleep in Maya's arms. The image haunted her like a ghost she couldn't banish that morning. She called her assistant in frustration. "Find me a new infant care specialist," she ordered sharply, pacing the nursery with Noah still fussing against her shoulder. "Find someone with credentials. The best, I don't care what it costs." Within hours, the resumes poured in. Pediatric nurses, childcare consultants, even a woman who had written a book on infant sleep strategies. Alexandra interviewed them one after another, each dressed in crisp suits, each speaking with polished confidence. Yet when they held Noah, the same pattern repeated. He wailed, he arched, he refused every bottle. Alexandra's composure frayed at the edges, though she fought to mask it with icy professionalism. By the end of the day, her mansion echoed with his cries, and every candidate left looking rattled and apologetic. That evening, when the house finally settled into uneasy silence, Alexandra sat on the nursery floor, leaning her head back against the wall. Her wineglass lay untouched beside her. She stared at Noah through the crib bars, watching the rise and fall of his small chest. Her hand reached out, almost against her will, brushing against the bars as though the gesture could bridge the distance between them. Her voice broke in a whisper she never intended to say aloud. "What did she give you that I can't?" The admission hung heavy in the room. She hated herself for the question, hated the weakness it revealed. But the truth pressed harder. Maya had given Noah something money couldn't buy: comfort born of instinct, of love, of presence. Alexandra pressed her palm to her face, stifling the sob that rose in her chest. The next morning, she gave in to curiosity or perhaps desperation. She had already read the background report on Maya, but it hadn't been enough. She wanted to see her, to confront what gnawed at her. She told her driver to prepare the car, gave an address she had memorized from the file, and tried not to think about what she was doing. The ride was short but jarring. The gleaming SUV turned off polished streets lined with designer storefronts and into a part of the city Alexandra had never stepped into. The apartment complex was worn and weathered, its balconies rusted, its paint peeling in shades of gray. Children played in the dirt with broken toys, their laughter carrying faintly above the hum of traffic. Alexandra hesitated in the car, her manicured hand tightening on the leather seat. She almost told the driver to turn around, but pride wouldn't let her retreat. She stepped out, her heels clicking awkwardly against uneven pavement. Neighbors turned to stare. Some recognized her face from magazine covers and whispered. She kept her chin high, though the eyes on her burned. She walked to the unit number she had memorized, lifted her hand, and knocked. For a moment, there, was silence. Then the door opened slowly, creaking on its hinges. Maya stood there, her face unreadable, her cheek faintly bruised where Alexandra's slap had landed days before. She wore a faded sweatshirt and jeans, her curls pulled back in. A loose knot. One of her nieces peeked out from behind her, curious but wary, Alexandra's throat constricted. For a moment she couldn't speak. Finally she forced the words out. "May I come in?" Maya studied her for a long moment, her eyes soft yet sharp, searched Alexandra's face with a mixture of caution and restrained anger. The silence stretched until Alexandra felt every ounce of her own shame weighing her down. Then, without a word, Maya stepped aside. The apartment was small, sparsely furnished, but clean. The smell of canned beans and baby lotion lingered faintly in the air. A threadbare sofa sat against one wall, toys neatly stacked in a corner. Alexandra lowered herself carefully onto the couch, as though afraid of wrinkling her blouse on the fabric. Maya stood by the kitchen counter, arms folded, waiting. Alexandra clasped her hands, struggling to meet her gaze. "I came to apologize," she said, her voice quieter than she expected. The words felt foreign on her tongue, heavy with resistance. "For what I said?" "For what I did. I was wrong and cruel, and I'm sorry." Maya remained silent. Alexandra pressed forward, her eyes finally lifting. "I reviewed your background. I know who you are now, what you've done. You're not just," she faltered, "you're not what I assumed. Noah hasn't been the same since you left." "I haven't been the same." Maya's lips pressed together, her jaw tightening. Finally she spoke, her voice low but steady. "Do you see me now?" The question struck Alexandra like a blow. She swallowed, her eyes burning. She nodded slowly. "I do, for the first time since they met." There was no anger in the room, no shouts, no venom. Just silence, fragile and heavy, stretching between two women divided by race, by class, by pride. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, the city moving on as if nothing monumental was happening in that small apartment. Inside, something had shifted. Alexandra Stone, billionaire, boardroom conqueror, untouchable in her own world, sat in. The home of a woman she had once dismissed, stripped of her armor. She had never felt smaller. She had never felt more human. And upstairs, far from that room, Noah slept uneasily, his body restless as though waiting for something or someone he could not yet name. The unraveling, the apology had been spoken, but words were not enough to mend what had been broken. When Alexandra returned to her mansion, the walls felt colder, the marble less grand, the silence more suffocating than ever. She tried to bury herself in business calls and endless meetings, her voice sharp on conference lines, her mind pretending to focus on quarterly reports and investment strategies. But in every pause, in every quiet space between conversations, she heard the echoes of her son's cries. They rang like a constant accusation, reminding her that even in her empire of wealth, she had failed at the one role money couldn't buy mastery of. Being a mother, Noah's restlessness grew worse with each passing night. He rejected every bottle, drank only in weak sips that never satisfied, and his cries grew hoarse from exhaustion. The pediatrician assured Alexandra that babies went through phases, that appetite could fluctuate, but Alexandra saw the truth in his eyes, that this was not normal. Noah's body was telling her something, his tiny fists clenching with a stubbornness that mirrored her own. He was crying for comfort, for the familiar heartbeat and warmth he had once known. He was crying for Maya, the realization tormented Alexandra. She would sit at his crib, clutching the bars as if they might steady her trembling hands, and whisper confessions into the dark. "I don't know how to fix this. Tell me what you need, Noah. Tell me what I'm doing wrong." But the only answer was his restless stirring, his whimpers that sliced through her soul. Word of the incident had spread faster than Alexandra anticipated. She had forgotten how quickly whispers traveled, especially when the person in question was a woman whose face graced business magazines and gala covers. It began with a leaked comment from the dismissed staff member, then spiraled into online speculation. The billionaire who fired her maid in disgrace, the slap, the insult. Soon tabloids were circling, paparazzi camped near her gates, headlines twisting into accusations of elitism, racism, cruelty. Alexandra's PR team scrambled, issuing carefully curated statements about privacy and personal family matters. But the damage was done. Images of her entering Maya's modest apartment were already circulating online, dissected by strangers who judged her every step. At her next board meeting, Alexandra felt the eyes of her colleagues weigh heavier than usual. Men and women who once flattered her now shifted uncomfortably, whispering in corners, measuring her power as though it had diminished. A partner leaned across the polished table and muttered under his breath, "Never thought I'd see you stumble like this." Alexandra straightened her shoulders, delivering her presentation with icy precision, but inside her stomach churned. She was losing not just control of her home, but the polished reputation she had spent years curating. And for the first time, she wondered if the empire she had built could ever shield her from the consequences of her own actions. Meanwhile, Maya carried the weight of her own turmoil, her apartment already crowded with her niece's laughter, and chaos felt suffocating with the constant intrusion of journalists who had tracked down her address. Neighbors whispered about the woman who had dared to defy Alexandra Stone, some with admiration, others with pity. Maya kept her head down, walking her nieces to school with her hood up, her heart heavy with the bruise that lingered not on her cheek, but in her spirit. She thought often of Noah, his tiny hands clutching her shirt, his small face pressed against her chest. She tried to harden herself, to remind her heart that he was not her child, that she had no claim to him. But the memory of his peace, the way he had melted against her, was impossible to silence. One evening, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Alexandra standing there again, this time with no entourage, no polished mask of control. Her blouse was wrinkled, her hair untamed, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Maya's nieces peered from behind the couch, whispering. Finally, Alexandra drew in a breath. "Please," she said, her voice breaking in a way Maya had never heard before. "I don't know what else to do. He won't eat, he won't sleep. He cries until his body shakes. I can't do this alone." Maya's arms folded across her chest, her expression guarded. "You sent me away like I was nothing," she said quietly. "You slapped me, you humiliated me. And now you come here because you need me?" The words cut, but Alexandra did not flinch away this time. She nodded slowly, shame in every line of her face. "Yes, I was wrong. I was cruel. I don't deserve your help. But Noah, he doesn't deserve to suffer because of my pride." Her voice cracked, the polished steel of the boardroom woman shattered into raw, pleading humanity. "Please, Maya, help me help him." For a moment, Maya's heart wavered. She looked at this woman, this billionaire who had everything and yet nothing, and felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Anger, compassion, sorrow. A tenderness she wanted to deny but couldn't. She thought of Noah's small fists, the way his cries had quieted in her arms, the way his body had trusted hers without hesitation. She thought of her nieces asleep in the other room, and how she had promised them she would always choose love over pride. Slowly she exhaled. "I'll come, but not for you, for him." That night, Maya stepped back into the mansion she had been thrown out of only days before. The air felt heavier, the walls colder, but when Noah's cries filled the space, she moved without hesitation. Alexandra watched as Maya lifted him, her hands instinctively gentle, her voice low and soothing. Within moments, his wails softened, his body relaxing into hers as though he had been waiting all along. Alexandra's throat tightened at the sight, shame and relief twisting together until tears blurred her vision. She turned away, but Maya's voice reached her. "He doesn't need perfection. He needs presence, he needs love." Alexandra stood, in silence, the weight of the words settling into her chest. For the first time, she realized that all the money in the world could not buy what Maya carried so naturally, the kind of love that asked for nothing in return. And in that moment, Alexandra Stone understood that her life was no longer her own, no longer just about her empire or her pride. Everything had changed. The collision of worlds, the mansion seemed like another world when Maya stepped inside again. her footsteps tentative, against the polished marble that gleamed beneath chandeliers worth more than her entire apartment building. Everything was immaculate, as if perfection could erase what had happened only days earlier. But no matter how polished the surfaces were, the air carried something raw and unsettled, a heaviness that clung to the walls. Alexandra followed a step behind, her usual air of command replaced by an unfamiliar humility, her shoulders drawn slightly inwards as though she no longer trusted herself to fill the room. Noah's cries echoed faintly from the nursery upstairs, each note laced with desperation. The sound pulled at Maya's chest, urging her forward. When she lifted him again, it was as if the storm broke. His tiny fists unclenched, his frantic kicking slowed, and his cries melted into soft whimpers. He burrowed against her chest as though finding home again after being lost too long. Maya closed her eyes, rocking gently, humming a hymn she had learned from her grandmother, one that carried the weight of generations in its melody. Alexandra stood in the doorway, watching silently, her throat tightening as relief and guilt twisted into something she couldn't name. She wanted to say thank you, but the words felt inadequate, too small against the magnitude of what she was witnessing. Instead, she whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know how to be what he needs." Maya glanced up, her eyes steady, her voice quiet but firm. "You don't need to be everything. You just need to be his mother?" The words landed with a weight that left Alexandra speechless. For so long she had equated motherhood with mastery, with control, with flawless execution, the same way she ran her empire. But in that moment she realized Noah didn't care about her boardroom victories or her spotless image. He cared about presence, warmth, arms that didn't tremble from exhaustion but from love. The realization was both humbling and terrifying. Over the next days, an uneasy rhythm formed. Maya came quietly, often after dark, slipping into the nursery where Noah would be waiting with restless cries. Each time he calmed in her arms, feeding without hesitation, his body relaxing into peace. Alexandra hovered at first, arms crossed, a fortress of pride watching her own son find comfort in another woman. But slowly her fortress cracked. She began to ask questions not with the sharp tone of a billionaire demanding answers, but with the quiet curiosity of a woman trying to learn. "How do you hold him like that?" she asked one night, her voice soft as she leaned against the crib. "How do you know what he needs?" Maya's smile was faint, tinged with weariness. "You listen. Babies don't speak in words, but they speak all the same. You just have to listen without trying to control." It was a lesson Alexandra struggled with, but she tried. She began to take Noah into her own arms again, watching closely as Maya guided her, adjusting her grip, encouraging her patience. There were nights when Noah still cried and refused her, his small body twisting until Maya took him back. Those moments pierced Alexandra's pride like knives, but instead of lashing out, she bit her tongue and watched, learning silently. Each time she forced herself to accept the truth. This was not a competition. It was survival, and survival demanded humility, but the outside world was not silent. The media had caught wind of Maya's return to the mansion, and soon the narrative grew louder. Tabloids published grainy photos of Maya entering through side doors, speculating about her secret role in the Stone household. Headlines screamed with judgment. "Billionaire mother outsourced to Maid?" Talk show hosts debated whether Alexandra was unfit, whether Maya was overstepping, whether the entire situation was a scandal. Online forums erupted with commentary, strangers dissecting both women as though their lives were entertainment. Alexandra's PR team urged her to cut ties, to replace Maya with a qualified nurse, to protect her brand. Investors called, their voices laced with doubt. One even muttered on the phone, "A woman who can't manage her own household has no business managing billions." The pressure pressed down like a vice. Alexandra stood in her study one evening, staring at the headlines scrolling across her phone, her hands trembling. She thought of her empire, her reputation, the years of carefully constructed power that now teetered on the edge of collapse. For a fleeting moment she considered letting go, cutting Maya out again, silencing the scandal by burying the truth. But then Noah's cry echoed from upstairs, sharp and pained, and the thought evaporated. She couldn't sacrifice her sons. Peace for public perception? Not anymore. She dropped the phone onto her desk, the headlines still glowing, and whispered to herself, "Let them talk." Maya, however, bore the weight differently. She was not shielded by wealth or influence. In her neighborhood, neighbors whispered about the scandal, some accusing her of overreaching, others cheering her as a quiet hero. Strangers began approaching her at grocery stores, some with kindness, some with cruel curiosity. Her nieces asked why people took photos of them, why kids at school whispered that their aunt was in the news. Maya smiled through it for their sake, but in private, she wept from the exhaustion of being judged for a role she never sought. She hadn't wanted the spotlight. She had only wanted to soothe the child. One night, after putting Noah to sleep, Maya lingered in the nursery as Alexandra sat in the rocking chair, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. The silence stretched until Alexandra spoke, her voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Why are you still here, Maya? After everything I did to you, after what the world is saying, why haven't you walked away?" Maya studied her for a long moment, her hands resting on the crib's edge. Finally she answered, her voice steady, carrying the weight of truth. "Because Noah doesn't care about the world. He just cares about who shows up when he cries. And I'm not the kind of woman who walks away from a crying child." Alexandra's eyes filled with tears, unspilled but glistening. For the first time, she allowed herself to reach across the gulf between them, her hand resting lightly on Maya's. "Neither am I," she whispered. And in that fragile exchange, something shifted, not a friendship yet, not forgiveness fully, but a recognition of shared purpose. Two women, divided by class, by pride, by wounds still raw, bound by the cry of a child who needed them both. Outside the nursery, the world kept judging, the headlines kept spinning, but inside, for that moment, there was peace. Breaking point, the Stone family estate had always been a fortress of influence, where Alexandra had learned as a child that emotions were weaknesses and appearances were everything. Her father, a stern titan of finance, had raised her on lessons of dominance: never bend, never falter, never expose your vulnerabilities. Her mother, regal and composed, had reminded her at every gala, every dinner, that the world would always be watching. Now, with the scandal burning through tabloids and whispers staining her name, Alexandra felt the invisible hand of her family pressing down on her again. They summoned her to a gathering, an intervention disguised as a polite dinner. The long oak table gleamed with silver cutlery and crystal glasses, but the air carried the chill of judgment. Her father wasted no time, his deep voice rolling like thunder across the table. "You have humiliated this family, Alexandra. Allowing a servant, no, a stranger, to take the role of a mother? Do you understand what you've done to our name?" Alexandra sat stiff, her jaw clenched, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wanted to shout, to remind him that she had built her empire herself, that she was not a puppet of their legacy anymore. But the words stuck, tangled by shame. Her mother's voice followed, colder than her father's fury. "There are things you do in private, Alexandra, and things you never let the world see. You've blurred those lines. You've let weakness show. People smell weakness, and they will destroy you for it." She left the estate that night with a storm raging inside her. The luxury car carried her back to the mansion, but her heart felt hollow. She hated that their words still carried power, that a part of her still craved their approval, even after years of building her independence. When she returned home, she found the nursery glowing faintly with nightlight. Maya sat in the rocking chair, Noah asleep against her chest, his small breaths audible even from the doorway. Alexandra stood silently, watching, her father's words echoing in her mind. Servant, stranger. The sight before her defied those words, yet also magnified the fear that maybe they were right, maybe she had lost control, maybe she was handing over her place as mother. Maya looked up, sensing her presence. Her eyes were calm but questioning. Alexandra stepped into the room, her voice breaking the silence. "They want me to send you away, my family, my advisors." Everyone thinks I'm losing myself, that I've ruined everything by letting you back in. Her words trembled on the edge of vulnerability. And maybe they're right. Maybe I am? Weak. Maya shook her head, her voice steady, carrying a weight that anchored the storm. Weak? No, weak would be letting pride matter more than your child. Weak would be pretending you can do it all alone while Noah suffers. Do you know how strong it is to admit you can't? Alexandra blinked, the words sinking into her like a balm against her parents' poison. For a moment she felt a flicker of strength not born of domination but of humility. She wanted to hold on to it, to believe it could be enough. But before she could reply, a sound shattered the fragile calm. Noah stirred in Maya's arms, then suddenly stiffened, his face flushing red. His tiny body arched, his cries erupting in jagged gasps. At first, Alexandra thought it was the usual fussing, but then the sound changed, sharper, choking, terrifying. His breaths came in short, ragged bursts, his fists trembling uncontrollably. Maya's eyes widened as instinct kicked in. Something's wrong. Panic clawed through Alexandra's chest as she reached out, her hands trembling. Maya quickly shifted, laying Noah against her shoulder, patting his back, whispering urgently. But his cries grew weaker, his face still tense. Alexandra's world blurred as fear overtook her. She grabbed her phone with shaking fingers, dialing the pediatrician, her voice cracking as she shouted into the receiver. Within minutes, the mansion filled with the urgency of professionals, doctors rushing in, monitors beeping, medical bags opening on the polished floor. Alexandra stood frozen by the crib, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break. Through her ribs, Maya stayed close, her arms steady, though her face was pale. She held Noah until the doctor guided him into trained hands. Alexandra reached out instinctively, but it was Maya's hand she clutched, gripping tightly as if she might drown otherwise. The doctor's voice cut through the chaos, calm but urgent. He's dehydrated, he hasn't been feeding enough. His body is weak. Alexandra's knees buckled at the words, shame and terror colliding inside her. She had known it, deep down, known that Noah had been starving for more than milk for comfort, for consistency, but she had ignored it until it became a crisis. As the night stretched on and Noah was stabilized. His small body finally soothed into fragile sleep under the doctor's care. Alexandra sat in the nursery with her head in her hands. Her empire, her family's judgment, her pride, none of it mattered in that moment. What mattered was the truth. That burned into her like fire. She could not do this without Maya. Not because Maya had more experience, though she did. Not because Noah responded to her, though he did. But because Maya carried a love that Alexandra had buried beneath years of armor, a love that Noah desperately needed. When dawn crept across the sky, Alexandra lifted her eyes to find Maya still there, seated in the rocking chair with exhaustion etched into her face but determination steady in her eyes. Alexandra moved closer, her voice breaking as she whispered, "You saved him again." Her words were not polished, not dressed in pride. They were raw, vulnerable, unguarded. "I don't know how to do this, Maya. I don't know how to be enough for him, but I want to learn. Please, don't leave us." For a long moment, Maya said nothing. She looked down at Noah, her hand stroking his tiny chest as he slept peacefully for the first time in days. Then she lifted her gaze, her voice soft but resolute. "I won't leave him, but you have to stop fighting me, Alexandra. This isn't about you. This isn't about me. It's about him." Alexandra nodded, tears slipping silently down her face. For the first time, she felt not like a CEO, not like a daughter living under her parents' shadow, but like a mother stripped bare of everything except love and fear. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid to admit that she couldn't do it alone. Redemption, the mansion had never been so quiet. Days had passed since Noah's health scare, yet the memory of it clung to the walls like a shadow. Alexandra had spent those days in a haze, never straying far from the nursery, her phone silenced. Her empire momentarily forgotten. Every breath her son took felt like a fragile gift, every small sound proof that he was still with her. Maya had been a constant presence, her steady hands and calm voice guiding through the storm. But the outside world had not stopped. If anything, it had sharpened its claws. News outlets feasted on the crisis. Rumors spun that Noah had been hospitalized because Alexandra was unfit, because she had trusted the wrong kind of woman, because she was unraveling under pressure. Board members called with veiled threats. Investors whispered about removing her from leadership, and her family's voices returned, harsh and unforgiving. Her father's voice thundered through the phone one evening. "Step down if you can't. Handle both. A stone does not show weakness." Her mother's cold words followed. "Do you want to be remembered as a failure to your child and your company? Decide who you are, Alexandra." That night, Alexandra sat in the dim glow of the nursery, Noah asleep in the crib, his tiny chest rising and falling in peace at last. She stared at him for a long time, her heart swelling and breaking all at once. Then her gaze lifted to Maya, who sat nearby, her frame bent with exhaustion but her eyes still alert, always listening for the smallest shift in Noah's breathing. Alexandra's chest ached with gratitude and shame. She realized she could no longer live divided between her family's expectations and her son's needs, between her pride and the truth. She needed to confront it all. 2 days later, Alexandra stood before a sea of cameras. The press conference had been her idea, though her advisors had begged her to avoid it. She wore no glittering gown, no armor of designer fashion, just a simple blouse and slacks, her hair pulled back, her face stripped of artifice. The crowd murmured as she stepped up to the podium, the billionaire who had ruled boardrooms now looking startlingly human. She paused, drawing in a breath, then began, "There has been much said about me in recent weeks. Some of it true, some of it cruel. But I stand here not as the woman you see in magazines, not as the CEO you measure in billions, but as a mother who has stumbled, who has failed, and who is learning." Her voice trembled but did not break. "When my son was in pain, when he was hungry and restless, I was too blinded by pride to see the truth. I sent away the one person who gave him comfort, the one person who loved him without condition, and I hurt her. I insulted her, I humiliated her." A hush fell over the room. Alexandra continued, her eyes scanning the crowd. "That woman is Maya Williams. She is not just a maid, not just an employee. She is a nurse, a caregiver, a protector, and a woman of strength I did not recognize until it was almost too late. My son is alive and thriving because of her, and I owe her more than I can ever repay." She paused, her throat tightening as tears pressed against her composure. "To Maya, I say this publicly, I am sorry. To my son, I promise this, never again will my pride come before your peace." Flashes erupted from cameras, reporters scribbled furiously. But Alexandra felt a strange stillness in her chest, as though something heavy had finally been set down. She left the stage without answering questions, ignoring the swarm of voices that chased her. When she returned home, the mansion felt lighter, not because the world had changed, but because she had, that evening. Alexandra sat with Maya in the nursery, silence stretching between them. Finally she turned, her voice low but steady. "I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I want you to stay, not as a maid, not as someone hidden in the shadows, but as part of his life, as part of this family." Maya's eyes widened slightly, her breath catching. For a long time she said nothing, her gaze drifting to Noah, who lay between them, his small face serene. Then she spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "I didn't stay because I wanted your apology, Alexandra. I stayed because Noah needed me. But if you truly mean what you say, then maybe he needs both of us, together." The words cracked something open inside Alexandra, and for the first time in her life, she wept without shame, tears spilling freely as she reached across the crib and took Maya's hand. There was no wealth, no power in that moment, only two women, both broken and strong in different ways, bound together by the fragile life of a child who had unknowingly bridged a chasm between them. Weeks passed, and slowly the world adjusted. The headlines shifted from scandal to redemption, from judgment to admiration. Investors returned, swayed by Alexandra's transparency and resilience. Her family remained cold, but their voices no longer held the same power. What mattered was here in the quiet nights when Alexandra and Maya took turns rocking Noah to sleep, when laughter replaced cries, when the nursery felt less like a battlefield and more like a sanctuary. One night, as Alexandra watched Maya hum softly to Noah, she whispered into the darkness, almost to herself, "I thought wealth was my greatest legacy. But maybe it's this learning how to love, learning how to listen because of you." Maya glanced up, her eyes soft, her smile faint but real. "And maybe," she replied, "your greatest legacy is raising a boy who will grow up knowing both strength and tenderness because he saw it in us." In that moment, Alexandra knew the truth. The story of her life had changed forever. Not because she had lost, but because she had gained something priceless. Pride had broken her, but love had rebuilt her. And in that rebuilding, two women, once enemies, had become something neither of them had expected: partners in love, in sacrifice, in the unbreakable bond of family. And as Noah slept peacefully between them, the storm outside finally faded, replaced by a dawn that promised not perfection, but something far greater: redemption.